So my story is the longest one in the anthology, which means I'm not reading the whole thing. It would take way too long. But I will begin with the opening paragraph and then give you a little information to fill you in on the details you need to know, and then we'll go right to the climax of the story, okay? I am eager to see how you accomplished such an intricate deception, Doctor. It must have been quite convincing to have frightened your wife to death. So that's the opening line. The Hollow is the name of the house, which is at the bottom of a lonely road. Dr. Harward is a phobologist, which means he's an expert in studying the effects of fear. Harward had two older brothers who were twins, and they were spiritualists. And at the end of the 1800s, they made a lot of money bilking people out of deceiving them, saying, we can get in contact with your dead relatives if you pay us enough money. And that's what they did. Harward thought the scam was despicable, but he found this house useful for its experiments because his brothers built this house with lots of tricks built into it, some of which are in the story. The other character you need to know about is Celia. She was the fiancée of the second main character, Van Felt. She got pregnant, but Van Felt left her to do some business deals. The baby died, and Celia was sentenced to a sanitarium, which is where Dr. Harward found her. The government would allow him to experiment on convicted felons, which now she was, but to get her out of the sanitarium and take her to the Hollow, he had to marry her. So she later died of the house, apparently of extreme fear. When Van Felt returned, he was driven to find the doctor and get some vengeance for his fiancee's death. He told Harward that he was interested in his experiments, and they go together to the Hollow. Harward disappears, and Van Felt gets to experience some of the tricks of the house. He hears Dr. Harward drive away in his horse and buggy. Van Felt leaves the house following the road. Although the road is completely straight, it has rock walls along both sides of it, and he just proceeds straight away from the house. He still finds himself inexplicably back at the Hollow. The story continues as Van Felt arrives. Finally, there were no lingering doubts. He was back at the Hollow. Van Felt stood in front of the steps, puffing. How had he gotten so turned around? It was Harward's fault, of course. All his tricks and his stealing the coach had frustrated Van Felt so deeply he was unable to focus. He looked up at the door with the lettering in red. There is no way out. A chill came over him in that moment. He cursed. A string of foul language crossed his lips in gouts. Overhead, the fog was pierced by warm orange light. There was a lantern in the attic window. Van Felt growled as he looked up. It was time to take care of business. There is no way out, Van Felt said as he crossed through the door. No way out for Dr. Harward, Ph.D. Inside, the cherub statue was upright again and the newspapers were gone. There was no stain on the floor and no broken glass. Then the gas lights all went out. The sudden darkness was palpable, and Van Felt flinched. I am so empty, whispered a voice that was supposed to be Celia but could not be. I will fill you, Van Felt snarled, using anger to override the niggling doubts in his mind. He removed his gun from his coat and held it out in front of him like a promise. He moved carefully in the dark, feeling his way to the stairway opposite the one he had explored before, and followed the hallway around to the back of the house. He smiled with murder in his eyes as he found the stairs to the attic. The smell of decay and rot was here. His feet crunched on something as he took the first step, and then the second. The moon, filtered by the fog, bled weakly through the window. At first, the stairway appeared to be covered with walnuts or pecans that had been cracked open and eaten, but there were other bits attached. He picked one up and examined it. It had legs and antennae, and Van Felt realized it was a beetle with all its insides scooped out. Van Felt dropped it, disgusted. There were other creatures on the stairs as well. Birds, a dog, several rats, liberated of their guts and brains and looking like nothing so much as empty gravy boats covered in fur. Van Felt swallowed thickly as he climbed the stairs. His hands were trembling as he reached for the doorknob. I am so empty. Clenching his teeth, Van Felt opened the door. The lantern was on the far side of the room, hanging in the window at the front of the house. A shadowy figure, a man, knelt in the middle of the floor. Van Felt raised his hand to shade his eyes against the sudden change of light. Dr. Harward? Van Felt, the doctor replied in a gravelled voice. His words were slurred and slow. There was a glint of metal on the floor, and Van Felt recognized the flask of bourbon that he had given to him. Obviously, the good doctor felt that now was the appropriate time to get drunk. The liquor will make you numb, doctor, which will serve you well. It's cold outside, and we have a long drive back to the city. Come along, we'll be going now. The doctor didn't reply right away. He pressed his hands against his chest and shuddered, his dyspepsia apparently flaring up yet again. Finally he spoke, and his voice was thready and low. There is no way out, he said. No more nonsense, doctor. No more tricks. Van Felt heard the quavering in his own voice, and the sound of it, the lack of certainty, made him angrier. He pointed the revolver at Harward. He repeated himself, forcing confidence into his words. You know the way. The doctor laughed. More accurately, he giggled. Nobody ever figures it out, he said. Nobody. You're drunk, Van Felt said, and a fool. Of all the terrible things I've invented to frighten people, that's the most devastating. And the easiest, really. No matter how hard they try to get away, they always find themselves back at the house. They convince themselves that there is no way out. Once they believe they can never escape, their minds belong to me. They are my toys to play with. He giggled some more. Van Felt cocked the gun, and the sound was brutal and cold. Tell me, he demanded. The doctor wobbled where he knelt. Van Felt was afraid the doctor would pass out. My mind does not belong to you. Tell me. The doctor stared at Van Felt as if teetering on a point of decision. He held up 2 fingers and tittered. Twin brothers. Twin houses. Each at opposite ends of a nondescript road and a stone wall that can be closed. Understanding washed over Van Felt like a bucket of cold water, but his anger only grew more heated. There was a twisted genius at work, to be sure, but the doctor should not have abused him so callously. I'm man enough to admit it, doctor. Your deception is elegant in its simplicity. I'm almost disappointed to know how it was done. You're still little more than a common charlatan. The doctor put his hand on the floor to steady himself. Do you know what's worse than frightening someone, good fellow? Or ruining their lives? Do you know what's more evil? Van Felt had no time to formulate a retort. I am so empty. The whisper was loud this time, right behind Van Felt's ear. He spun around and fired. The sound of the shot made him jump despite himself. There was nobody there. You can put the revolver away, Harward said. It will do you no good here. I'll be the judge of that, Van Felt said, turning back to face the doctor. He cocked the gun again and watched the man struggle to his feet, using a wooden pillar to keep himself upright. The doctor lit a second lantern. Then he shuffled toward him, wobbling. Stay where you are, Van Felt said. I'll shoot you. Harward laughed again, and his voice was filled with bitterness. I have already tried that, he said. He reached up and pulled his hair off his head. The toupee fell to the floor and lay there like one of the rats on the stairs. Slowly, trying to maintain his tenuous balance, the doctor pivoted around. With no hair to hide it, Van Felt could see that the back of the doctor's head was missing. Bits of brain and shards of bone surrounded a ragged hole in the middle of his cranium. I tried to kill myself, the doctor said, as if he were explaining nothing more concerning than why the sky was blue. I put the barrel of a revolver, much like yours, into my mouth and pulled the trigger. I awoke not long after. She won't let me die. Not yet. Not until I've finished my penance. Van Felt heard a rattling sound and realized it was the gun in his trembling hand. Why? Who won't let you die? He asked the question even though he knew the answer. Harward sighed as he lowered himself to the floor again. He dropped the last foot or so and grunted as he hit. He giggled some more, and Van Felt found the sound terrifying. I nearly forgot, the doctor said. There are introductions to be made. He pointed toward the side of the room. That part of the attic had been in shadow before, but now was lit by Harward's second lantern. The blood drained from Van Felt's face when he looked. Part of his brain refused to acknowledge what he was seeing. Another part instantly understood the tableau on display. A line of chairs, 10 or 12, had been placed against the wall. 4 bodies sat together, sitting upright. Their hands had been positioned on their knees like an audience waiting for a play. That's where the resemblance to anything normal ended. Each one of the bodies was empty, their clothing missing their front parts. The forward halves of their heads and torsos had been removed and all their organs taken away. Van Pelt could see the interiors of their skulls and their spines and the anterior ribs at the back of the cavities. The edges of the openings were scalloped, as if they had been chewed upon by monstrous insects. Van Pelt suddenly became aware of his bladder and the liquefaction in his bowels, which extended somehow to his knees, threatening to give way beneath him. "To our left, I'm sure you recognize Celia's parents," Harwood said. "You and I are the only beings alive who know they are here. They are visiting the continent, presumably, and have no plans to return." Van Pelt had met the woman once and recognized the hat, and he had no cause to doubt that the man next to her was her husband. His hat teetered at an odd angle on top of his empty head, looking ridiculous. "Next, Judge Oliver, who I'm sure you know, sentenced Celia to reside in a sanitarium for the remainder of her natural life. He apparently has run off with a mistress, leaving his wife and children behind, but we know differently." Pointing at the fourth corpse, Harwood said, "And this poor chap was the driver of the carriage who brought us here. Acting is more dangerous a profession than he realized. When we're done with you, good fellow, there's a particular nurse who likes to slap her patients. And worse, I think she'll be next." Van Pelt struggled to find his voice. I was going to come back," he managed. I had business dealings. I didn't mean to leave Celia alone to give birth. And then when the infant was found dead, how could I go to her defense? How could I do anything but distance myself until business was settled? How could I jeopardize our future?" Harwood was nodding. "We always find ways to justify ourselves, do we not? We always have the best of intentions. But we're all empty if we only knew it." You did kill her, didn't you?" Van Pelt prayed for a good answer, but he didn't know what it could possibly be. Harwood said, "She was resilient, and I admired her for that. I faked my own death so she would be alone in the house. Even when she was afraid and crying, I never stopped admiring her." Van Pelt, "When I heard you were not to be held accountable, I vowed to bring you to some kind of justice. I could do that for her at least." Harwood, "In the end, she was frightened and sleepless, and when she became convinced that there was truly no way out, she vanished. For a while I couldn't find her. When I did, she was here, in the attic. She had found some shears and cut herself open. She lived long enough to remove all her intestines and organs and lay them on the floor. Her heart was still in her hand, cold. Then she spoke to me. She said, 'There must be something broken inside of me, but I cannot find it. And now I am so empty.'" Van Pelt was backing away, more unsteady than Harwood now. I need to be leaving. I can't be here any longer." "All the evil I had created had returned in a new form," Harwood said. "There was no more science." Van Pelt's eyes were wild, jumping back and forth from Harwood's face to the small, hollow audience seated on the side of the room. Harwood went on. "As it happens, I'm a terrible sadist, and you are ruled by your ambition, and it was Celia who paid the price for us both." Van Pelt did not, or could not, speak. "I asked you a question. A while ago," Harwood said. "I asked you what was worse than frightening someone. What was worse than ruining a life, as you and I have done? Do you have an answer, dear fellow? It is clear to me that all the things human beings do to each other, the lying, the cheating, the abuse, the murder, the most evil thing we can do is take away hope."
"I am so empty!"
Then Celia was there, standing in front of Van Pelt. Her face was much as he remembered, all soft and winsome, with large dark eyes, now purest black. Her hair fell to her shoulders in a satin cascade, and it seemed to move as if she were standing in a gentle breeze. She was wearing a white see-through shroud, and beneath it she was naked. An angry red scar ran from between her legs all the way up to her neck. The scar was shiny and suppurating. Van Pelt screamed as the scar split apart, and he saw rows of jagged teeth inside her gaping wound. He staggered backwards, firing the gun into her until it was empty and there was only the click, click, click of the hammer, and then he was overwhelmed. Mercifully, his heart gave out as he entered her embrace. Then only the echoes of the gunshots accompanied the wet, snapping sounds.